Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future, the History of Ideas podcast. Today, it's the first in a new set of episodes as part of our series on great political fictions. I'm going to be talking about a set of novels from the last 100 years, some of them suggested by listeners, all of them, I hope, revelatory in their different ways. And I'm starting with one of the two great dystopian fictions of the 20th century, the two defining dystopian fictions of the 20th century. This one is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. In Germany, after the Second World War, when the country was divided in two between West Germany and East Germany, one result was a whole set of inadvertent natural social experiments. Take a society, divide it in half, give each half a completely different social, political, economic setup, and see what happens. Korea is the other one, North Korea, South Korea. So this happened across all sorts of dimensions: economic life, political life, also family life. And one of these experiments, if one can call it that, related to child rearing, and specifically to potty training, toilet training. When and how should children be taught how to use the toilet? And in these two societies through the 1960s and 1970s, West and East Germany, the answer to that question was very different. In West Germany, under the influence of various liberal ideas of child rearing coming from the United States, coming from elsewhere in Europe, the increasing focus was on child-led potty training. Let the children find their own way. Don't hassle them. Don't harass them. Don't make them feel bad about it. Even though we're Germans, let's learn to live a little with the embarrassment, the accidents. Don't stress the children out, because if you stress them out when they're very young, the stress will carry through to life. And as a result of that, toilet training in West Germany, not everywhere, but in the more liberal parts, was later and later. Children were 3, children were 4, and they were still finding their own way. If you let children take their time, boy, will they take their time. That was the liberal experiment in the West. In East Germany, it went completely the other way for a whole host of reasons, one of which was most children from a relatively young age, in some cases from a very young age, were raised in state-run nurseries or kindergartens. And that was in part because mothers in East Germany were much more likely to go back to work. In some, though not all respects, East Germany was a less patriarchal society than the more liberal West Germany. Mothers would go back to work, their children would be farmed out to state-run nurseries. And in these state-run nurseries, partly because when children are in nursery it's a lot easier when you're not changing nappies or diapers all the time, partly because in East Germany money was tight, resources were tight. Why waste money and resources keeping children in nappies longer than they should? And partly because of the philosophy of the state, which is train these children to be good citizens from an early age. Toilet training happened very young. As it got older and older in West Germany, in East Germany, it stayed at about 18 months, in many cases pre-verbal toilet training. And the children in these kindergartens were sat around on their potties in little groups, and they were disciplined. They were taught to relieve themselves on time in a way that made the nursery staff happy with the results. There wasn't any anxiety there about stressing them out. The idea was to turn them into well-functioning citizens at an early age. So in one society, liberal, child-led, loosey-goosey, don't stress about the embarrassment, don't stress the child. In the other society, socialized, disciplined, collective, and very young, pre-verbally young in many cases. Now, I don't know, although I'm sure people have studied, the results of this social experiment. I don't know, for instance, is Angela Merkel, for the people who do know, a classic product of East German potty training? Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. I raise this because this natural social experiment came to my mind when I was reading Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Because one of the many extraordinary features of that extraordinary book is that it offers a vision, a dystopian vision, a satirical vision of a future society, which, among other things, completely merges those two models of child rearing. You might think you couldn't merge those two models of child rearing. Either you're on the liberal loosey-goosey side, let the child decide, let the child discover its own body, let the child work out what it's comfortable with, or you're on the socialized, disciplined, regimented collectivist side. The society that Huxley depicts in Brave New World is both of those things at once. The book begins with the reader and a group of characters in the book being given a tour of a place called a hatchery. People who don't know Brave New World but know something of it are probably aware that one of the central images in the book is a kind of factory of human production, from embryology through to early infancy to education. The hatchery is the place where human beings are hatched, and they are effectively hatched in factory conditions. We see the embryos being conditioned. We see the children being educated in these extremely regimented and uniform ways. One of the features of this society is that children fall into certain types. And given the type of child you are, you will get a completely uniform education, and it will be entirely collective. It will not be geared towards your identity, because in this society, people don't have those kinds of identities. They have been manufactured to fit certain roles. In all those respects, very East German. And a lot of the best-known images from this book are images that would not be out of place in a society, though we don't get this in Brave New World, but we might as well do, in which a group of 10 or 20 or 100 children are all sat on potties and all taught to do the same thing in the same way at the same time. We do see glimpses of an educational environment in which children of the same kind are all taught to do the same thing in the same way at the same time. So for all those reasons, this feels like it is a dystopia which anticipated, because this book was written in 1931, published in 1932, but anticipated some of the societies that were to emerge after the Second World War. But it's nowhere near as simple as that. Because, again, early on in the book, there is a shocking scene, shocking to contemporary readers. It certainly shocked me. I suspect it would have shocked Huxley's original readership too. Just when you think you have a sense of what kind of society this is a satire of socialism and socialist regimentation and uniformity and the production, the creation of citizens. In this tour of the hatchery, the people who are being showed around encounter a couple of young children who are having some kind of spat or fight. And it turns out it's a lover's tiff. Yes, sure, children have lovers' tiffs. Of course they do. They think they're in love with each other. But what we discover is this isn't just a lover's tiff. This is an argument between two very young children who have some kind of sexual relationship with each other. These children are sexualized. And they are sexualized in ways which to us is meant to be completely shocking. They are treated as sexual creatures. In the hatchery, there is no attempt to suppress or discipline or limit any sexual feelings that even a very young child might have. If a child feels sexual attraction in this world, there is nothing, no moral code, no educational instruction that is designed to prevent that child from acting on those sexual feelings. And in fact, we get a little vignette of how this society views something that we view very differently because, and this is a running theme, one of the jokes in Brave New World, occasionally characters refer to earlier societies, earlier versions of human attempts to organize themselves in ways that are sustainable. And these earlier societies are societies like ours. And in this future world, we are a ridiculous joke. And one of the ways in which we're a joke is that we thought that the sexual impulses of children should be repressed. So the man who's giving the tour, who's the director of this hatchery, this factory of human reproduction and child rearing, says to his audience, and this is the joke, I quote, he says, "For a very long period before the time of our Ford," and I'll come back to what our Ford means, "and even for some generations afterwards, erotic play between children had been regarded as abnormal. And then Huxley says of the audience, there was a roar of laughter. Abnormal? Children as sexual beings? He goes on, not only abnormal, actually immoral. And his audience shrieks, no, you're joking. Immoral rather than moral, wrong rather than right, for children to be exploring sex at a very young age with whoever they fancy. And he concludes, and therefore this had been rigorously suppressed. We suppressed the sexualization of children in earlier versions of human society. Thank God we're enlightened now. Thank God we know that children should be allowed to be themselves. And if themselves is sex, so be it. The reason that East-West German experiment came to mind is in the 60s and 70s in West Germany, as aspects of West German society were becoming increasingly liberal, loosey-goosey, one might say, hippified. One of the features of late 60s, early 70s liberal or libertarian thought was the campaign to treat children as sexual objects, or sexual beings, I should say, in the name of their freedom. Sexual liberation for children, and if children wanted to have sex with people older than themselves, and if people older than children wanted to have sex with children, was that such a bad thing? So in the history of mad social experiments, not accidental, but mad, one took place in West Germany, I think it was in West Berlin, in the late 60s, early 70s, in which it was concluded by some social workers that vulnerable adolescents, young boys, who needed to be placed in foster care might thrive if they were placed in foster care with adults who had a sexual interest in young boys, because there would be a better chance under those conditions of fostering a loving relationship. When I say mad, I mean mad. That experiment didn't run for long. But we shouldn't think this is some insane West Berlin idea. In Britain, in the 1970s, the paedophile information exchange, which was a cause that was taken up by some people on the left, campaigned for the liberalisation of child sex laws on the grounds that children are sexual beings too. Now, I think it's fair to say that from the perspective of the 21st century, we look at that with some horror. But the Brave New World vision was a vision of a society in which both the idea that children should be allowed to be themselves, find themselves, seek pleasure where they wanted it, not be embarrassed about their bodies, not be embarrassed about any of the things that they might naturally feel inclined to do, the absolute libertarian vision, could coincide with a society organized in a uniform, regimented, socialized and socialistic, highly disciplined way. A society of maximum discipline and maximum freedom to seek your pleasure where you find it. And that, in a way, is the theme of A Brave New World. Huxley was imagining a future in which the world that he lived in, and his world precedes that post-Second World War experiment, a book written in 31, published in 32, is on the cusp of a very different experiment, which was about to take place in Germany starting in 1933, one of the most disastrous political experiments in human history. But Huxley was envisaging a world in which the divisions, the ideological divisions, the intellectual divisions, the great divide, you either see the world this way or that way. You're either a freedom seeker or you're a socialist. You're a capitalist or you believe in equality. You believe in discipline or you believe in license. The classic divisions of the modern world have collapsed in the society of A Brave New World. They have collapsed into each other. They haven't merged into some holistic whole. They simply coexist in the same society. And this is the theme across the book. So one other example of this, to go back to that quote, is the reference to our Ford. This society is imagined, I think it's something like 600 years in the future, but it's the era of our Ford. Ford being the deity or the god of this society. And the Ford in question here is that Ford, the car Ford, Henry Ford, the one I talked to Sarah O'Connor about in our episodes on the future of work, the Ford or Fordism, the inventor of the production line. This is a society in which human production, in the sense of the production of human beings, is done on a production line. In that hatchery, the embryos circulate around and they are tweaked and conditioned by people who stay in place. The children move around and they are prodded and poked and conditioned by people who pass them through the system. So it's a production line world, and that's why it worships Henry Ford. Henry Ford is its god, and yet it is also a world whose governing philosophy is the opposite of all the things that Henry Ford believed in. Henry Ford was an American firster, an isolationist. He was the embodiment of capitalism. And this is a world that Huxley imagines, which has a world state, a socialist world state. Capitalism in that sense has been abolished. Everything is centrally controlled. All the things in politics that Ford railed against have come to pass in a society that has adopted all the things that Ford pioneered in his factories. It is a mashup of Ford and anti-Ford, in the same way it's a weird, before the event, mashup of East German and West German child rearing. It is a world which is governed by the practices of corporate life. It is a highly corporate world in the sense that we would recognize these factories, these industrial enterprises, the way that they're managed. And yet it is also a regimented, state-run socialist world. It is a coming together of Ford's corporatism and the community spirit of a socialized world. And this is a world state. It is not a nation state. We're in England, but we're in England, which is no longer a country or a nation. It's just part of the world state. This is happening everywhere, we're meant to believe. It's all been taken under control. And part of the reason it's been taken under control, we're told in some of the early history of the evolution of this society, is because of the complete failure of capitalism. Capitalism has failed, and it has been replaced by this. But the clearest sign that it's a hybrid world in which the divisions of the 20th century and earlier centuries, the divisions of modernity, the classic ideological, political, moral, intellectual divisions have collapsed into a single model in which they are combined, is revealed by the names of the characters. The characters have pretty ridiculous names. It's quite a heavy-handed signal, but a signal it is nonetheless, because the characters are given names which are a mashup of rival visions of how to organize a society. So there is a character in this book called Benito Hoover. 1931, 1932, Benito Mussolini was the fascist leader of Italy. Herbert Hoover was the capitalist, but also, by that point, it was increasingly clear, fatally unsuccessful president of the United States, the man who presided over the Great Depression. But Mussolini and Hoover were not, in most people's minds, part of the same thing. But here we have someone who's called Benito Hoover. There is a character called Darwin Bonaparte. First name Darwin, second name Bonaparte. You get the idea. There's another character called Herbert Bakunin. The Herbert here is, I think, a reference to Herbert Spencer, the great Victorian advocate of the survival of the fittest, the abuser of Darwinian ideas in order to create an account of social hierarchy. Bakunin, the great 19th century Russian anarchist. One of the main characters in the book is called Bernard Marx. Bernard is a reference, I think, to Bernard Mandeville, the 18th century Dutch philosopher and satirist, who was known as the man who celebrated the inadvertent benefits of selfishness and of the pursuit of luxury and commercial goods. That if we're all out there just looking for pleasure and seeking the best for ourselves in a selfish way, actually the outcome will be social benefit, an earlier version of some of the arguments later associated with people like Adam Smith. Marx is Karl Marx, Mandeville and Marx mashed up together. The main female character in the book is called Leninina Crown, Lenin and the monarchy. There's a character called Helmholtz Watson. Helmholtz is a reference to a great German physicist and also neo-Kantian philosopher. Watson is John B. Watson, the early pioneer of behaviorism. All of these characters are a mashup of two seemingly opposing views of the world. And that's one of the themes of the book. This is a vision of a society in which these things have collapsed into each other. That is its distinctiveness, and in some ways that is its horror. Its horror is that it is no longer possible to separate these things out because some rationalized version of the human future is the one in which the things that are our divisions have been abolished in the name of, well, that's the question, in the name of what? It should also be said that Aldous Huxley himself was something of a hybrid character in the spirit of his own book, though he is satirizing this society and he's not presenting it to us as something that we should aspire towards. He's like a character from Brave New World. He was born into a family of scientists. His grandfather was T.H. Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, the great Victorian defender of Darwinism. His brother, Julian Huxley, evolutionary biologist. But he was an artist. He was a novelist. By the time he published Brave New World, he'd already published a series of satirical, amusing society novels. This was something of a departure. He was an artist in a family of scientists. He was also an artist who spent some of the 1920s working in a chemical engineering factory in the north of England that was meant in part to have inspired his vision of the factory production of individual human beings. So he bridged both those worlds. He was a skeptic, and by the end of his life, he was a mystic who was experimenting with psychedelic drugs. He was a very difficult person to pin down. He was a friend of D.H. Lawrence, and some of his views about human sexuality might have come from D.H. Lawrence. He was a friend of D.H. Lawrence, but he was also a friend of eugenic scientists. A hybrid author picturing a hybrid world in which things have been mashed together in a very unsettling way. It's very hard to know where we, 20th, 21st century readers, are in relation to this future society. It's hard to place ourselves because you might think you found the thing that you feel comfortable with, and then you discover that it goes along with something that horrifies you. But even though this is an imagined society in which a lot of different things have been collapsed into a single social arrangement, I think it's clear in his own terms what Huxley is satirizing. I think in particular he's satirizing two things in the society that he envisages. And those are not capitalism or socialism. It's not actually Marxism that he's satirizing. I don't think he is satirizing either an imagined future which is West German or East German, were he to know what those things were. If I had to put a name to the two things that he is mocking in this vision of a society in which our divisions have collapsed, one would be Keynes and the other would be H.G. Wells. Keynes' The New Economics, for a book that was written in the depths of the Great Depression, an increasing awareness that Keynes was at the forefront of, that capitalism was prone to these catastrophic booms and busts, and the reason was the disconnect between production and consumption. Capitalist societies had a tendency to overproduce and then to shrink and shrivel as human beings lost their animal spirits and withdrew, saved too much, and then the state had to step in, stimulate demand, stimulate growth. There was a need for stimulus. That would be one of the words associated with the New Economics. In order for modern societies to survive, they were going to have to find a way to keep pumping the consumerist impulse, to keep these ways of running economic systems going by making sure that people don't retreat, they don't get scared, they don't do too much and then do too little. An equilibrium is maintained. And Huxley is very clear that the world that he is picturing is one in which boom and bust has been abolished, in which human beings do not consume madly and then overextend themselves and panic and retrench any more than the society as a whole consumes madly, overextends itself, and then retrenches. Everything is well calibrated. Everything is well designed to keep the machinery of production and consumption well balanced, but also thrumming along permanently. And the way this is achieved in the world of A Brave New World is by producing human beings to be consumers. That is the satire here. The pure version of this kind of economics that will abolish boom and bust, the pure version of the stimulus is to stimulate the human beings to keep buying stuff. So we are told this is a society that has been designed to make sure that different people will buy different things, and that those people will have been conditioned from birth to like and desire those things, and they will be free to seek their pleasures and to consume what they want to consume. It's of a spirit with a society in which people are absolutely free to pursue their sexual desires and impulses from a very early age. But it is completely clear that the only way this society can function is the early conditioning of human beings to be the right kinds of consumers. And Huxley says this society has experimented with alternatives, but the alternatives don't work. So it tried, for instance, once it had reached a point where the technology was there that people didn't need to work that hard to produce the kinds of things that they wanted to consume. Maybe it could move to a vision, which was in some ways Keynes's vision, of a society in which machinery and technology would do the heavy lifting and people would work much shorter hours and they would have much more time, not just for consumption, but for leisure activities, for intellectual investigation, for the life of the mind, to become better versions of themselves. That vision that always haunts both capitalist and socialist societies, that one day we might be freed from the curse of work to be more ourselves. Huxley says in this society, in its long evolution, they tried that. He says they tried it in Ireland. Ireland was chosen as the place to run this particular social experiment. They tried the 4-hour working day. It was a disaster because people got bored, they got frustrated, they got depressed. They had to take the state-supplied antidepressant, which is available for anyone who wants it, because the key thing about this society is people don't get depressed. They keep thrumming away. They keep working and consuming. They keep the productive capacity of society balanced. And they are conditioned to be those people from a very young age. So this is a vision of what a purely new economics or Keynesian society might look like. And it won't look like Keynes's utopia of a world in which eventually we are freer to be ourselves. It will only work because the human beings that make up this society have basically been built under factory conditions to be ideal, consistent consumers. And that's part of the horror. Who wants to live in a society like that? The other person that he's satirizing much more explicitly, because he gets name-checked in the book, is H.G. Wells. This is the world state. H.G. Wells was an advocate of the world state. This is a kind of version of H.G. Wells' socialism, and Huxley was horrified by Wells's socialism, that he thought was sterile but also fantastical. He thought it was obviously utopian. It should be said that Wells was horrified by Huxley, and Wells, a couple of years later, wrote his own riposte to this book, and he accused Huxley of pessimism and superstition. Wells believed in a version of the future which is not a million miles from the one that Huxley describes, just without the obvious satirical horrors. One of the things I think that Huxley is satirizing in this book is H.G. Wells's attitude to sex. Wells was a libertine in the sense that he led a very full and, by conventional moral standards, rather immoral sexual life. That is, a lot of sex outside marriage, a lot of affairs. He was a brute, basically. But nonetheless, he also had a view of sex that it was a natural function. We should get rid of all of our repression. We should be more open about it. And it was almost a hygienic view of sex. This is the sort of thing that people should do just to keep things ticking over. Don't get repressed. Don't get hung up. That thing that Huxley is clearly satirizing with the children playing their sex games, that's not a direct reference to H.G. Wells, but the wider vision that he portrays of sexual relationships in this society, in which adults like children are told that the rules are, there are no rules here. You just take your pleasure where you find it. And this has become the new convention. So one of the jokes is that anyone who wants to take their time, meet a possible partner, and then maybe delay having sex with that person, or only have sex with one person rather than having sex with lots of people whenever and whoever takes their fancy. These people are the deviants in this society. The norm is to do what you like. The norm in this society is not for men in the workplace to do everything to make sure that women don't feel like they're being ogled or groped, but for men, including bosses, to ogle and grope whomever they like, and for the women to think that the bosses who don't do that have something wrong with them. Anyone who gives off a whiff of repression is to be mistrusted. Anyone who just goes for it, whatever the circumstances, regardless of what might be thought to be the moral expectations of earlier social conditioning, is completely fine. And that, I think, is a satire on H.G. Wells. So this society is conditioned and constructed to be balanced and calibrated, but also in which all bodily functions, disease, reproduction, sex, have been made as hygienic as possible, have themselves been turned towards factory conditions, the factory settings. You just do whatever you feel like doing in a society that has been designed to make sure that people doing what they feel like doing creates the conditions of social harmony and the conditions of perpetual motion. It can just keep thrumming along like this forever. How are the people conditioned to exist in this society? How are they made and regulated? There is a view of A Brave New World that it is an early dystopian vision of genetic engineering, or in its own terms, the terms of the society from which it comes, where these ideas were prevalent, particularly among progressives. It's also a book informed by the idea of eugenics. Genetic engineering, where the tinkering comes at the genetic level, or eugenics, where the way in which the society is constructed is to make sure that you don't allow the reproduction of the kinds of citizens that you think are subpar in some way or another, and you encourage or maybe even mandate the reproduction of human beings who are much better in whatever way you want to measure it. Actually, it's neither of those two things. So Huxley himself, like his brother, was a eugenicist. One of the ways in which this book is a vision of a society gone wrong is it might be saying by implication, this might be what happens if you don't do eugenics. Because this is a very hierarchical society in which there are lots of people who are known to be, indeed designed to be, subpar in various ways. This is not a society in which the weak, the intellectually underperforming, the less strong are weeded out. You make them in factories too, because you need such people. Indeed, you need a very clear hierarchy, and the way it's calibrated is from alpha to beta to gamma to delta. Good old-fashioned sort of snobbish Oxbridge view of the world. Are you an alpha person or a beta person? That's Huxley's world. He would be familiar with people who talked like that. But he is envisaging a society where you need the gammas and the deltas, because for this economic, industrial, social arrangement to work, you need the people doing the factory work. And any attempt to build a society where machines rather than people do the factory work means there won't be enough consumers, because either you breed those people who would have done the factory work out of existence, but the trouble is the machines aren't doing the buying, or you leave those people in existence but with nothing to do, in which case they become angry and frustrated and you get social instability. What you need are people at different levels, bred for different conditions, in order to fill different roles. The alphas are the managers. The alphas are the ones who arrange it, who run the factories, who run the industrial enterprises, who create the consumer products and also create the cultural products. And the cultural products in this society are of a piece with the idea that this is a place where you want people just to have easy access to pleasure. The cultural products in this society are not complicated, they're not difficult. They're cheap pop songs and cheap wraparound all-sensory movies that are known as the feelies. You go to the cinema and you don't just get visual stimulation, you don't just get oral stimulation, you get full sensual stimulation. The smells, the feelies, the feel of it. The people who produce what's needed to keep this society thrumming along are the alphas. And Huxley envisages this society as being stable but under threat. And the threat doesn't come from below. So it's not eugenic, but it's also not really genetic engineering. There are some allusions to that. Huxley is much clearer that this is a Pavlovian form of conditioning. That is, it's behavioral, and it is done like Pavlov's famous experiment with his dog. It is done by exposing human beings from the earliest point. So in the factory, the embryos are conditioned because the embryos are subject to stimuli, light and sound, to make them be attracted to certain things and to be repelled by other things, to create the right kinds of conditioned human beings who then, when they are born, and then as this is reinforced through childhood, a lot of it done in sleep. So these creatures are going to be conditioned by listening to and being exposed to stimulation while asleep, which will condition them to want certain things, not want other things, to desire certain kinds of things. Within that range of desire, they will be free to seek and pursue their desires however they see fit. But the desires have to be maintained. That's the crucial thing here. You've got to keep these creatures desiring the stuff that's being produced. And it's going to be Pavlovian all the way through the story of human development and education. The way it is done is not that different from making the dog salivate when the bell rings. Just somewhat more sophisticated versions of that. And Pavlov is also regularly name-checked in this book. Huxley is clear. This is a conditioned society. It's not that the tweaking is done at the genetic level. It's not people's characteristics that are being adjusted and adjusted and adjusted. It's their conditioning that is being calibrated and calibrated and calibrated. And it is a years-long process to get the people just right. If you're a beta, you'll be conditioned in a certain way. The challenge for this society, the threat to it, doesn't come from below. The assumption is that in this world, the lower classes, and they are classes effectively, have been conditioned so that there is nothing really that's likely to lead them to step out of line. Their needs will be met, their wants will be met, their desires will be met, largely because their needs, wants and desires have been conditioned to be the kinds of needs, wants and desires that can be met by the kinds of things that this society is producing. It's the alphas, and the alphas are the people at the top, the managers, the people who run this society. It is the alphas who pose the threat, because they have to be conditioned to have somewhat more freedom of thought. To design such a society can't itself be something that is simply drummed into them like a bell that makes a dog salivate. And among the alphas, and it is among the alphas that we live in this book, these characters are in the alpha world. Among the alphas, there is much more instability. And the people who run this society are aware that among the alphas is where the instability lies. Another of the experiments that they ran at an earlier point in their evolution was to create a society of alphas. What would happen if you did get rid of the betas and gammas and deltas and just went with the top people? If you had a society which had been eugenicized right to the point where only the best remained. And they discovered that it was a disaster, because in such a society, there's so much jostling for position, because these people all think of themselves as capable of doing the top jobs, but they can't all do the top jobs. You can't have any society in which everyone is in charge of the hierarchy. Some of them had to do more lowly or menial jobs. Well, if they do lowly and menial jobs, they spend all of their time scheming how they can get the top job. They are overeducated. They are overqualified for the roles that they're going to have to play. And again, if the alternative is to say, well, maybe a few of them can do the jobs that need doing, and the rest of them can do their own thing, write books or have fun in some other way. These are alphas. If you let them write books, they're going to write subversive books. If you let them have fun, they're going to start thinking, is this fun? I want something more meaningful. In the book, a couple of the characters, Bernard Marx is one, Helmholtz Watson is another, are examples of alphas who chafe against the restrictions. We do not meet any of the lesser classes who chafe. We just see them in their regimented bliss, playing tennis, at the Feelies, listening to pop music, having sex when they feel like it. This is a society in which, unless you're one of the people who is allowed freedom of thought, there's nothing to worry about. And if you do get stresses and strains, there are drugs for that. The alphas are encouraged to take drugs, this drug called soma, which will settle them down, less like an antidepressant and something more like a mind-expanding stimulant, and it'll make them feel fine again. Don't take it all the time because you've got a job to do, but basically you're free to take as much soma as you want. And many of them do. But Bernard Marx, Helmholtz, Watson, they're not satisfied with that for different reasons. Bernard Marx is a man who feels he doesn't fit because he's small and he's not good looking. He's still told you can have sex whenever you want, but he's spotted there's something a bit off about that because he's not completely sure people want to have sex with him. He's super smart. He has a feeling there's something special about him. He also has a slight feeling of victimhood. He hankers for something more. He hankers for meaning, as does his friend Helmholtz, who is the other way, in the sense that he's particularly good-looking, smart, self-confident, self-sufficient, and he's dissatisfied by simply having an alpha role. He wants more. And both of them have this sense that the thing that might be missing is the validation of suffering, that there might be pleasure in suffering, there might be meaning in suffering, there might be meaning in pushing against the constraints rather than going along with them, and then when the constraints chafe, taking soma or having sex with someone that you pick up on the street. They have a feeling that they want constraint. They want constraint in the way they interact with other human beings. They want constraint in the way they communicate. They want something that they come to feel might be art, but art for art's sake, not art for the sake of consumption. And they are the flies in the ointment. They are the things that will cause this society to fall apart if they are allowed their way. In order to control people like this, because the people who really are in charge, who are a level above these two, this is a society which has been fixed in place in its relationship to the future and the past. So this is also a book in part about the relationship between past, present, and future. This is a society fixed in the present. The future, as well as the past, have been abolished. It just thrums along in a permanent, continuous equilibrium. Nothing deep down is meant to, or indeed can, change, because change would mean collapse. The future has been abolished because this is not a society that believes in scientific progress. The scientific progress has happened, and it's now fixed. If you keep inventing new stuff, it will get out of whack again. You can't keep calibrating the human beings if at the same time people are devising new things, new experiences, new ways of being. This is a society that has all the progress it needs: medical progress, drug progress, enlightened sexual progress, industrial progress, and then stop. None of the alphas are in the business of experimenting, designing new stuff, blue sky thinking. The imagination has been shut down in that respect. No future and no past, in the sense that the past in this book is a thing to be laughed at. The past is there, people are aware of it, but they know it as a joke, as in that example of the children playing their sex games. Once upon a time, that was frowned on. Can you believe it? Can you believe how people used to live? But it's the past, not the future, that gets them. And the reason the past gets them, in a slightly contrived plot device, but still very effective. This is a world in which people can take a holiday in the past. There is a reservation in New Mexico. This is a world state, so you can go where you like. There's a reservation in New Mexico, which is basically a savage reservation. You can go on safari among a group of human beings who have been kept in the previous condition, our condition, that is, the readers of this book. People like us, 500 years earlier. Our world, or a version of our world, has been preserved so that people from the New World, the brave New World, can come and visit and gawp and laugh and wonder and tell stories when they get back home. Bernard and Lenina, who are in an on-again, off-again, weird, unhappy, dysfunctional relationship because they can't decide when and how to have sex because they're out of sync, take a holiday to the reservation. And they see a world which is completely different from their world. It has disease in it. People age naturally. In their world, you don't age at all, and then you just die. Death has been completely hygienized and commodified as well. These consumers, produced under factory conditions, serve their function, and then when the function ceases, they are simply rendered obsolete. No one's meant to be frightened of death. Death is just the end of a story in which it won't be painful. You'll barely be aware of it. You'll just stop working. But in this world, people die terrible, painful deaths, and they age in horrible ways. Their skin gets wrinkly, they go yellow, their teeth fall out. This is a world that has very bizarre rituals. It has something that they come to understand is religion. Both pagan and Christian, they discover in this world there are symbols that people worship. One is a cross, and one is an eagle. This is a very primitive world in the sense it seems to be anchored hundreds of years ago from the time that Huxley is writing. This is Roman Christian life. These people are poor. But the thing that they have that is most horrifying to the inhabitants of the New World is family. They live in families. Families have been abolished in the new society. Families are not efficient. And we are told that the biggest joke of all is imagining a world in which there were these things called mothers and fathers who preferred their own children, had a special preference. How could you prefer your own child? Everybody's the same. You have to know which group you belong to. But within this subset of the betas, there are thousands of people who are identical to you. Imagine thinking that one of those people was special. No one is special. Everyone is functional. And yet they discover that in this earlier version of life, mothers and fathers liked their children, indeed valued their children, more than all other human beings, regardless of their children's qualities. And it doesn't just shock them, it doesn't just amuse them, it disgusts them. We are told that the word father and mother are disgusting. I quote, "Father was not so much obscene as, with its connotation of something at one remove from the loathsomeness and moral obliquity of childbearing, merely gross, a scatological rather than a pornographic impropriety. Father was the comically smutty word. The obscene word, the ultimate obscenity, was mother, the mother who produces the baby in her own body, not in a factory, and then nurses it and loves it and weeps over it and hugs it close. And the vision that we're given is of a world, our world, in which people live in these disgusting places called homes. Home, home, Huxley writes in the mind of his characters. A few small rooms, stiflingly over-inhabited by a man, by a periodically teeming woman, by a rabble of boys and girls of all ages, no air, no space, an understandability prison, darkness, disease, smells. This is not just meant to be a description of slum life, of the poorest. This is what home is. It's a prison. You confine yourself to the home, smelling, breathing the same air, hugging each other, loving each other, thinking each other is special until you can't stand the sight of each other. There is nothing more disgusting for the people from the New World when they encounter the Old World than home. But in this journey that Bernard and Leninina take, they meet a pair of characters from the Old World whom they bring back to the New World. One is a woman who got left behind on a previous trip. She's one of them, but she got left behind. And having been left behind and abandoned in the savage reservation, she had a child with one of the savages and raised that child as a savage. She is now a wreck of a person. She's been wrecked by motherhood. She's also been wrecked by sentimentality. And also, she didn't fit into this society. She assumed she could have sex with whoever she liked. It turned out in this pagan Christian world, people really disapproved of that. She was ostracized because she lived like one of the new humans in the old human world. The point is, they come to our world and we would be as disgusted by them as they are by us. But she has a child, a son, whom she raises and loves, and he is a product of the savage world. He is known as John the Savage, and they bring him back. They want to display him. They think he's a curiosity. This is a version of 18th century life in which people went out to what they thought was the new world, but was actually the old world, and brought, as they called them, savages back to poke and display and laugh at and occasionally fall in love with. Leninina falls in love with John the Savage. John the Savage comes from a world in which he is a very physically embodied person. He does not want to have sex with anyone who passes. He's looking for love. He's looking for companionship. He's looking for all the things that no longer exist in the society to which he's been taken. But he brings something else with him as well, because there were books in the old world, the old books that have been abolished in the new world, but they linger in the old, a few copies, old parchment copies of this and that, one of which is the works of Shakespeare. And John has spent his childhood, his adolescence, reading the works of Shakespeare, and he is completely imbued with Shakespeare. Shakespeare is where the title of the book comes from, Brave New World. From The Tempest, oh, brave new world that has such people in it. In The Tempest, Miranda sees the new people, thinks they're wonderful. She doesn't realize they are just humans. as terrible as all the rest, and the savage also doesn't know that he's going to be taken to a new world where they think they've abolished all of the ills of the old world and discover it has such people in it. They are as monstrous as humans ever were. They've just hidden it from themselves. The savage is brought back. And it turns out that Bernard and Helmholtz and the savage, none of them can fit anymore. Shakespeare has ruined the savage, and Helmholtz, who is searching for ambiguity in a world in which everything is fixed, who is searching for tragedy. He has a sense that maybe it would be better to live with the possibility of moral and human disaster, finds in Shakespeare what he's looking for. Bernard, not so much, but Bernard gets a glimpse of the possibilities of domination. The thing that he wants is actually to lord it over other human beings. Both Helmholtz and Bernard are in part, I think, Rousseauan creatures. One of the characters in the book is called Jean-Jacques Habibullah. Jean-Jacques is Rousseau. Rousseau's description of how human beings became what we are has in it two versions of corrupting influence on us. One is amour de soi, self-love, and one is amour propre, a certain kind of love of a certain kind of status. Helmholtz has amour de soi. He loves himself too much. Bernard has, or suffers from, they would say, amour propre. And they are, for that reason, the flies in the ointments. They will corrode the whole thing. If people are allowed to seek out suffering because they think it will ennoble them, if people think they have all of the sex and stimulation and indeed comfort, even happiness that they want, and they want something more. Well, what's more than happiness and comfort? You are the alpha of the alphas. Solitude, suffering, art, Shakespeare. Can't let that in. The savage and Bernard and Helmholtz all have to be banished. This society cannot survive with them in place. Bernard and Helmholtz are told by the people who run this society that there is a place for them. They have created an alpha world. It's a world which is only made up of alphas, and they are free to do their own thing, and no one's going to interfere with them, and they will probably find fulfillment there. But it is cut off from the rest. It's not an experiment within this society. It's entirely removed. You can go and be yourself, but we will not let you be yourself here. You are going to your own reservation. Tourists won't come and visit you there. By all accounts, all sorts of lively and interesting things happen there, for better and for worse, in many cases for worse. We're sending you to the Alpha reservation, and you're never coming back. The savage is banished in a different way. He becomes a freak show. He becomes a celebrity. People come and gawp at him. They come and watch him. He tries to find solitude. He escapes and escapes again. He tries to find a solitary house in the middle of nowhere, and helicopters fly overhead to take pictures of him. And people want films of him, and they want to know what he's up to, and they want to track his every move. It's like a nightmarish version of The Truman Show, though he knows he's in it. And he hangs himself. This society cannot accommodate either the man who lives by Shakespeare or the men who value the idea that they might be different, for better or for worse. They're not attractive characters at all, any of these people. You're not meant to, I think, particularly to sympathize with or admire them, but they are very human. They are the humans in this story. And in this society, humans who develop because they have found something that doesn't fit cannot be tolerated. Is it prophetic? So in some ways, it is astonishingly prophetic to read it now. Bits of it take your breath away. It feels so 21st century, so 2020s. The drugs, the mood-enhancing drugs, the way in which pharmaceuticals are used to regulate human beings who are finding it hard to live with this kind of comfort and endless consumption and free access to all sorts of pleasures. People who either hanker for something more or who are just bored, there are drugs for that. The cultural products feel very now. The feelies, though this book was written in 1931, in some ways I think it feels more contemporary than a book that it clearly helped inspire Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, with its glimpse of a dystopian satirical pop culture world. This one, I think, is better. We get pop lyrics from this world. Hug me till you drug me, honey. You're the one that I want. I don't know how he saw it so far in advance. We get a sense of what the movies are going to be like. What are the feelies going to be like? There's a point in this book where one character says to another, you need to go to see this new movie. I quote, there's a love scene on a bearskin rug. And in these films, of course, people can have sex whenever they like. There's no censoriousness about this. The one thing they can't have is relationships. The thing that would be banned would be an actual love story. There's a love scene on a bearskin rug. They say it's marvelous. Every hair of the bear reproduced, the most amazing tactual effects. I still remember the time when I saw Pixar's Monsters, Inc. in the cinema. If you haven't seen it, Sully, the big blue creature. The individual hairs on his fleece, his covering, completely blew my mind. Still does occasionally, just thinking about it. This is from 1931. This is a Pixar world. This is a world of Spotify. This is our world. But the way in which it is most obviously our world is it is a world of Pavlovian consumption. Ring the bell and they will salivate, but taken to ever greater levels of calibration and sophistication. You've got to keep the people buying or this thing will fall apart. And you keep them working and buying until the machines do the work, but we're worried about that. Are we going to do the Brave New World Ireland experiment of 4-hour days? There's a lot of anxiety that the whole thing might fall apart. So just keep them at it, and keep them at it by conditioning them and triggering them with all of the little bells and whistles by which we live, all of the prompts, all of the things that we aren't even aware are prompting us to keep buying, keep looking, keep searching, keep scrolling, looking for the new thing, swiping in a world in which swiping is one of the bases of human relationships. The endless, never-ending, repetitive world of Pavlovian consumption. This dystopian vision from 100 years ago set 500 years in our future feels very now to me, and more now than I think any other book written in that period. The people who say, actually, it's Brave New World that foresaw the kind of world we live in, I think are part right. And yet, in one respect, this isn't our world, because for the Brave New world to function, past, present, and future themselves have to be brought into alliance with each other. And the way that that is done is the past and the future are both collapsed into the present. The past just becomes a tourist destination, a joke, a thing to laugh at. The future becomes something that is simply ruled out of bounds, because everyone has all they need in the present. And that, I think, is not our world. So if this is a vision of a society in which we are all Pavlovian consumers, yes, that is us. And I don't know how that's going to end. But the world in which everything is hybrid, because everything has been conjoined with everything else. Not just the names of the characters, but the social, economic, and political systems. There is no ideological division in the society, not simply because ideology has been abolished, not even because ideology has been transcended, but because what people used to call ideology just coexists without anyone even noticing it. These things, it turns out, can all fit together perfectly easily, perfectly happily, as long as you hatch human beings in the hatchery who fit their social role and all of whom are endless consumers. And then there will be no future and there will be no need of the past. So it is true that a lot of us feel a lot of the time like we are increasingly being conditioned to be endless consumers. More than 5 years ago, more than 10 years ago, definitely more than 30 or 40 years ago, definitely more than that version of society that I began with in West Germany, a consumer society. And this is uniform. We're not in a world state, but we're in a world consumer state. And yet ours is also a world in which past, present, and future have not collapsed into each other. The future still exists. My God, the future still exists. And it could be anything. One of the reasons it could be anything is we haven't run those experiments with people not working, People working under different conditions, the machines and the people working together, the machines consuming on behalf of the people consuming what the machines make. I don't know what that's going to be like. We haven't abolished ideology. We haven't abolished different visions of the future. It's not a world state. It's a world consumer state in which we might still also see terrible destructive wars, economic collapse. We have not ironed out boom and bust. We know that. We know that the relation between humans and machines might simply be creating the next bubble, and when it blows up, my God, all of it will fall apart. We still live in families. We have not abolished Christianity. We have not entirely distanced ourselves from the Romans. We have not got rid of disease. We live in a world in which some people age in ways which are completely familiar from Brave New World. I'm sure we all know people who look like they have abolished aging and are factory constructs in their physical presentation. And you can walk down the street and see someone who is the same age and who looks like their grandparents. A friend of mine who went to a school reunion of people my age, late 50s, came back and said, some of them look like they're some of the others' grandfathers. Past, present, and future coexist. We haven't ironed it out. And because they coexist, they haven't collapsed into each other. They coexist. They also, in many ways, threaten each other, destabilize each other. We still have Shakespeare in our Spotify world. We still have savagery in our hygienized world. So it's like we're half living in Huxley's imagined future without any of the conditions that make that imagined future possible in his terms. None of the conditions of stability, of equilibrium are there. And yet we're running this vast social experiment with Pavlovian consumption. And no one knows how that story ends. At the start of this episode, I mentioned the two dominating dystopian fictions of the 20th century, certainly in English. The other one is, of course, George Orwell's 1984. And tomorrow, there is a bonus episode coming out on PPF Plus in which I discuss that book in depth. I've often alluded to it, but I've never really talked about it. And in this bonus episode, I really try to say what I think that book is about. And some of it, I hope, is a little surprising. If you would like to get that episode, you know what to do. And if you sign up to PPF Plus, you'll never have to hear me asking you to sign up to PPF Plus again. Go on the link in our show description, go to our website, ppfideas.com. It costs £5 a month or £50 for the year. You will, in future, get 2 bonus episodes every month, ad-free listening. You will get sign up to our fortnightly newsletter, but you will also get immediate access to the now 50 bonus episodes that exist on the PPF Plus archive. Do join. Next time in our regular slot, I'm going to be talking about one of the greatest novels ever written, Doris Lessing's masterpiece, The Golden Notebook. Do join us for that. This has been Past, Present, Future.